perfection. So hello everybody. I'm waiting for people to join because I'm live on YouTube and Instagram right now. But like, I feel so overwhelmed by all of the stuff that's going on in the world and the types of comments that a lot of my content is bombarded with. And I wanted to discuss this because I'm hoping that if I put descriptors to some of the attitudes that we tend to see in the comments of any posts about advocacy, that it might help give people the confidence to speak out themselves if they haven't been able to yet. And I also wanted to kind of elaborate on how this is like a deliberate tactic to try to subdue any forward momentum when it comes to advocacy. And we see it with any type of forward effort. It's not just with horses. It's anything in the world where people are nitpicking the tone used when you're advocating for something and you're trying to create change. They'll nitpick every little aspect in the way someone is trying to advocate for change, be it nitpicking how protesters react and saying that all protests should be peaceful, even when there's many well-documented instances where protesters have been persecuted by police and brutalized while they have been protesting peacefully. And then you get the reaction to that violence, and people use that to try to shut down the fact that people are protesting and be like, see, these people shouldn't protest. This is incredibly violent and not peaceful. This shouldn't happen. You also see it with horses, where if you talk about, and like, it doesn't matter what type of abuse you're talking about, you can bring up literally anything. So let's say we're talking about roll current dressage. People will be like, well, what about the big lick Tennessee walking horses? What about this? What about the real forms of abuse and the horses who are starving, the horses who are shipping to slaughter? And they engage in this whataboutism to try to deflect from the actual point. Meanwhile, almost 100% of the time, if you go onto the pages of people who do that, they're not engaging in any advocacy themselves, not even for the very things that they are claiming are worse forms of abuse. And if people truly believed that those worst forms of abuse needed to be discussed more, they would be participating in the advocacy themselves, but they're not. They only bring it up as a buzzword to try to detract from other people engaging in advocacy. And it's a tactic to try to shut it down. Another example of this tactic is when people do things like, oh, well, like, what's the solution to this problem? You don't have the right to point out the fact that something is unethical unless you have a fully thought out, reasonable solution to plan how to fix it. And I also don't think that's fair. You can say, hey, this is wrong. We shouldn't be doing this to horses or people, without having a fully thought out plan of the way out, because the first step of planning a way out to plan systemic change is by addressing the fact that there is something wrong that needs to be changed in the first place. So you can't really make positive change without acknowledging the fact that there's need for change in the first place. And anyways, there's no limit to the amount of logical fallacies and excuses that are used to try to detract from people who are trying to engage in advocacy, where you're held to an impossible standard, where your tone always has to be perfect. You always have to word things in a way that won't upset anyone or create any type of negative response. And you're also held accountable for how your words make people feel to an insane degree, where it's like, oh, this is making people defensive. This is your fault. But the problem with advocating for changes that are against the current system is that you can't do that without creating discomfort. You can't. It's not possible. You have to, by nature, create discomfort, because a lot of people fear the unknown, and talking about doing things a new way scares a lot of people, and it'll make them defensive and oftentimes cause them to lash out. But that doesn't mean that it shouldn't happen. That doesn't mean that these things shouldn't be said. So this is something that I experience honestly on a day-to-day basis. It doesn't matter what I say. There's been posts where I've literally just said, hey, here's some studies on this topic, and here's why we should be more informed about the decisions we make. I did a post like that about how boots and wraps heat up the tendons in horses' legs a lot compared to bare legs, and the risk factors associated with that. And I included a number of different studies that people could look at to see. And people still got defensive about that, where they're like, you're shaming people. So the mere presence of saying, hey, like, this is something that's widely done and normalized, but here's some concerns with doing that thing that you might want to be aware of. the mere presence of doing something like that makes people defensive and makes them feel attacked, because there's a huge portion of people who do not want to make changes to what they do. And then they blame you for exposing them to information that they would prefer not to see because they want to ignore it. When really, in a progressive society, when we're trying to move towards changing and doing better as we know better, information is valuable because it allows you to make an informed decision. Even if you don't listen to that information, seeing that it's there and having a look at it and seeing whether or not it's relevant to what you're doing helps you make more informed decisions. But we have a pretty decent number of people who run from information, who want to shut down the sharing of information, who feel like they are being mistreated by people sharing information that makes them uncomfortable. And they want to live in this echo chamber bubble where they don't have to be exposed to things that conflict with the worldview that they want to have. And they want to be able to do that without people sharing on their own pages. Because one thing with my advocacy in particular is that I make a point of basically only posting stuff on my own pages. I don't spend a lot of time commenting on other people's posts. If I want to respond to a post, I will take it to my page and comment there. So ultimately, if people don't want to see the types of things that I stand for, they don't have to follow me. And yet a lot of people who perpetuate this idea of perfect advocacy go out of their way to go on my page and make comments and consume my content and suggest that I shouldn't be posting the things that I'm posting. Meanwhile, they're usually the same people to pull up the freedom of speech excuse when they are called out for spewing hateful rhetoric towards marginalized groups. And it's a huge cop out because the entire notion of freedom of speech doesn't protect people from consequences of what they say. If you're saying really hateful stuff or you're advocating for the mistreatment of animals, people have every right to have an opinion on that and share it with you, because freedom of speech goes both ways. Freedom of speech does not entitle you to does not entitle you to shutting down anyone who disagrees with you. And that's the thing. People are allowed to say what they want online. No one is stopping them from doing that, but it doesn't mean that people can't respond to what you're saying and take what they feel it says about you and your character and use that accordingly. So I find myself in a position where I'm feeling very frustrated, I'm feeling very anxious, and I'm feeling very stuck and powerless when it comes to like inciting change in the world, because no matter what I do, it's not good enough. And I think this speaks for a lot of people who are attempting to advocate now, because I've looked at the comments of a lot of other posts of people who are advocating for different systemic changes. And it's a common theme in those posts where people are constantly trying to tone police them and suggesting how they should change XYZ thing to be more palatable to people to make change. And there's this fixation on how to engage in this perfect advocacy so as to never upset anyone or rock the boat. Meanwhile, in doing so, they're upholding structures that are really harmful to masses of people. And they aren't holding their governments and elected officials to the same standard of perfection, where they shouldn't be saying or doing things that have the potential to cause harm. As it stands now, just to be blunt, there is an elected official, like the president of the United States, who has a ton of sexual assault accusations against him, among other things that call to question his credibility. And I've seen people time and time again excuse the fact that he has these accusations on the basis of, oh, well, he never was charged for it because they were settled out of court. And that's the excuse, is he was never charged for it. Those same people go and they advocate for the policing and arresting of people without warrants because they might be an illegal immigrant. And they call all of those people criminals. They say that they're all criminals, they're rapists, they're murderers. And it's like, where are the receipts? You're not holding people to the same standard. You're bringing things up to try to derail an important discussion and turn heads away from exposing this issue, but you're not consistent at all in your advocacy. Because if it's really about the fact that there's no proof if people haven't been charged for doing things, that should apply to everyone, but it doesn't. It's a cherry picking of who they apply these certain values and logic to, and they are widely excusing the actions of certain people while persecuting other people for doing way less. And it's a form of trying to derail any discussion, and it's constantly moving the goalpost, where it's set up essentially to rig it against any advocates, to make insane standards that cannot be met. to try to dissuade people from advocating and give an excuse to just not have it happen. Like, honestly, the goal of people who do stuff like this is just to get everyone to shut up and stop saying things that make them uncomfortable. It's not about your tone or how you go about things 9 times out of 10. It's the fact that they don't want you talking at all. The only way that you could engage in perfect advocacy in the perspectives of people like this is just by shutting up and not saying anything at all. And I don't think that's right. The other thing that I want to note is that all of the systemic changes that we have seen in the world have been the result of people pushing back against status quo and making changes. And the thing that I think really bothers me when we're looking at the need for systemic change and current injustices ongoing in the world is that there are tons of people who are saying, like, oh, well, it's not against the law or it's not XYZ. And it's like, you want to know what also wasn't against the law once upon a time? Slavery. If we're just going to follow laws, regardless of whether or not they are ethical, then we're not going to meet any forward progression. And I would argue that the vast majority of people are against the idea of slavery and would speak out against that. I would also argue that the vast majority of people think that what happened during the Holocaust is horrible and unethical and terrible. The most people would say that because now, after you're seeing the aftermath of all of that and the outcome and the subsequent changes and how general society views those practices now, it's a lot easier to speak out against it and be like, yes, that's terrible because it's popular and the outcome has already happened. Meanwhile, during those times, all of the people protesting and advocating against those things were viewed as disruptors. They were viewed as people who were violently disrupting the status quo and who were causing mayhem, who weren't peacefully protesting. I can also bring up the women's suffragette movement to get women the right to vote. Those protests, look them up. Look what happened. Police and other people fucking beat the shit out of women's suffrage protesters. The protests were not peaceful, and it wasn't just on the side of the people protesting for women's right to vote. In fact, it was mostly on the side of people who were against that, beating the shit out of the protesters and creating violence that created a response from the protesters as a result. None of these movements were achieved peacefully. None of them. There was pushback. People had to create chaos. They had to make a scene. They had to fight back against violence that was being inflicted on them. Yet, most people in this modern day would agree that they appreciate the outcome of what those movements and what those protests led to because they can recognize the fact that women having less rights and being viewed as inferior is not okay. They can recognize the fact that enslaving people because of the color of their skin is not okay. They can recognize the fact that rounding people up because of who they are and torturing them and putting them in camps is not okay because they're looking at it in hindsight, where hindsight is 2020. But what we're seeing today on a massive scale is the very same rhetorics and narratives being used to try to justify the persecution of different populations. And just because it's different people than how it was in the past doesn't mean the attitudes behind it are not the same. There's a lot of parallels and similarities. Go ahead and look up the way that some of the really hyper-conservative news outlets are speaking about illegal immigrants. They're referring to them as aliens. They're using dehumanization tactics. They're calling them all rapists and murderers. There is no population of people where you can have millions of people who are all exactly the same. There is none. People can't fucking agree on anything. Are you really going to look me in the eye and tell me that there's a population of people that is all comprised of terrorists and murderers? Like, it is the most insane thing ever. It makes no sense. You cannot collect a million people and have them all agree on the same thing. There's always going to be people that do not follow, even if it were the common theme, which I don't think it is. There's always going to be people who don't agree with it. So trying to justify the persecution of these huge bodies of people on the basis that there might be some bad people among them is absolutely fucking ridiculous. If you were to take that same logic and apply it to the everyday citizen of Canada or the US, it would mean that because there are people who are citizens of our country that do bad things, and there's plenty of them, that all of us would be complicit in that. Or that because our countries do bad things, that we are all complicit in that and that we all deserve to be attacked as a result of that, as a result of those decisions, that we're all bad. That is the rhetoric that is being used to persecute marginalized populations. And if it were reversed and applied to Western societies, no one would like it because suddenly they would be the ones under persecution. They would be like, that's not fair. I don't agree with that. Those don't resemble my views. But they're comfortable doing it to other people because it's not personally impacting them. And they've been trained and propagandized to hate certain groups of people that are not causing their problems. If you actually go and look at how much shit has changed over the last couple of decades, or even like the last just the last decade, the cost of living has exploded. As someone who was growing up and like a teenager throughout the 2010s and seeing what the cost of things were and seeing like what we were told in school, it was all this narrative about if you work really hard and you go to post-secondary and you do XYZ, you will get ahead in life, you'll be able to live a good life, you'll be able to do XYZ, this will happen. And people did that. People went to post-secondary, they got degrees, they did what they were supposed to do, and they still don't have any fucking money because the cost of living has exploded. And if you go and look at the richest people in the world, look at how much their net worth has gone up over the last decade. It is very clear who is causing our problems today. And it is not your everyday citizens. It is not the lower and middle classes. It is the 1%, which is a very small group of people that we vastly outnumber, who, for whatever reason, because of how much of the media they control, we have convinced people that those people should be protected at the expense of millions and billions of other people. It makes no sense. All of the stuff that impacts us on a day-to-day basis in terms of making our lives actually shittier generally stems from poverty that is not self-imposed, that is imposed by people who are making billions of dollars, and their entire existence as a billionaire is reliant on exploiting a huge population of people. So they want to redirect your anger to other people. They want you to be mad at marginalized people. They want you to single out the people who are less protected in society. They want you to single out small groups of people that are easy to attack, and they want your anger to be generated and directed at those groups of people, because it means that you're not looking at who the actual problem is, and it means that those groups cannot organize. They want us to all be fighting with each other, because if everyone is fighting over little stupid things that don't actually impact any of us, we cannot collectively fight them on what they are doing. But genuinely, regardless of how you feel about immigration or anything that's going on, there is no one who is fucking you over more than billionaires and billionaire corporations, and corporations who are essentially running entire countries because they have bought all of these politicians and have created this narrative where they have incredible control over masses of people.